Welcome, everybody. I'm Jeff Miller. I'm with TechWise Arlington. This is Erica and Katie. They're with Lex Kids Be Kids and also Schools Beyond Screens, which they'll tell you about in a few minutes. We're really excited to host this event tonight, so thanks to everybody for coming. I'm sure there'll be more people that will filter in, but it's great to see a full room here and a lot of people interested in this topic. Please come in. Just to get a show of hands, how many are from Winchester? Okay, so a pretty good majority. How about Arlington? Okay. How about other towns, surrounding towns? Okay, Lexington, excellent. Cambridge, okay. Medford, okay. Great. Well, I think we have a handful of towns here, and anybody from outside of Massachusetts? No. I know there was also a lot of interest in this being recorded. So we are thanks to Winchester WinCam. Thanks to WinCam, we are recording this event, and we'll be able to post a video recording of this online. And we're really grateful to have Justin Reich here today, who's been gracious enough to share his insights with us on this topic, which I think is a really valuable topic. I just want to provide a little bit of backdrop before we get into Justin's presentation. So how did we get here? I'm going to show you just a few charts. I like charts. I could show you dozens more, but I'm going to show you just a few to get started. Please come in. So the backdrop to our conversation tonight is we have a mental health crisis among our youth. An anxious generation is what it's been coined by Jonathan Haidt and others. But this is one metric on the page here. It's just the percentage of teenage girls who feel persistently sad or hopeless. And that has gone from about a third in 2011 to more than half. The majority of teenage high school girls feel persistent sadness or hopelessness. So that's a alarming statistic. There are many more, not just girls, but many other statistics that are in line with this. The hypothesis that was put out there, and there's a lot of evidence to support, I personally believe it, is that the introduction of smartphones and the rise of social media on those devices in the mid-2010s and over the past decade has contributed to that mental health crisis. Not the only factor, but it's a contributor in my view. At the same time, Chromebooks and other educational technology have been increasing significantly in schools over that same time frame. Chromebooks were launched in 2012 and really gained prominence over the course of the 2010s. And with COVID, we all know we were in crisis mode, and one-to-one became just absolutely critical during that moment, especially around here and in many other places. And so we went to one-to-one for every grade, basically. And I think in some schools around the country, we've seen receding from there, but it definitely moved the percentage up significantly. And given the promises that were made in the mid-2010s, you would have expected that scores would have gone way up and there would have been much better educational outcomes, better educational equity, and so on. We have not seen that. The screens in the schools have contributed to distraction. This chart that I have here is the daily leisure screen hours during school. So it's particularly talking about people using screens for non-school purposes during school hours, and the more they do it, unsurprisingly, the worse the PISA scores are. PISA is an internationally recognized standardized test for math. And I think as many of us know, the Chromebooks in the schools are not just used for educational purposes, they're also used for many non-educational purposes. So more school screen time has correlated with lower scores. Why is that? It certainly has not driven much higher scores. There's a piece out in the New York Times this afternoon about school districts all around the country and how many of them are actually below the benchmark that they were about a decade ago. Some of that is COVID for sure. There's been a learning loss, but what are the other factors that have contributed to that? And then the other big trend is that during the last few years, AI has really gone from being, call it a flunking elementary schooler, to a A+ master's student. This is the score of the frontier LLM models on a multi-subject knowledge test. So think of it as a college level test of many subjects. So it's gone from 25% to 90% over the last 6 years. So that's the backdrop for how we got here. And then I'm in business. I work in a finance and strategy role, and I'm an economics major going back to college. So I always like to think about incentives. Incentives really drive design. They drive outcomes. There's a famous investor, Charlie Munger, who says, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome." So let's just talk quickly about the incentives of a couple of different areas. So the companies that produce smartphones, but particularly social media, the more time that their users spend on the app, the more money they make. That's their business model. It is monetizing the time and attention of people. Now, I don't think many of us in this room pay a monthly subscription fee to the social media companies, and there's a reason for that, because we are not their customers. Their customers are the advertisers, and we are the product. Our attention is the product. So with that as the incentive, what is the outcome? Well, teens spend 4.8 hours per day on social media. Significantly more hours than that just on the phone overall, but just on social media, 4.8 hours a day. If you think about that over the course of a childhood or of an adulthood, the numbers get pretty alarming and really add up into the decades of time that you'll be spending on social media if you extrapolate forward. And we should think about the opportunity costs of that. When it comes to educational technology, the business model is more devices equal more licenses equals more revenue. So most of the companies involved in educational technology are either selling hardware or they're selling software, and it's typically on a per device basis. And so the more students that have devices in their hands, the more revenue those companies will make. And the outcome of that is we have one-to-one Chromebooks at 86% of US elementary schools, and much higher number at high schools, et cetera. Now, artificial intelligence. This is a newer theme, but the incentive is it's the fastest, most lucrative, and in my view, possibly the most dangerous arms race in history. And I would include in that the nuclear arms race. I mean, we don't know what the outcome of artificial intelligence is, but there are a lot of potentially very bad outcomes that could exist with artificial intelligence. All that said, there's a lot of power to the tool and a lot of potential applications, and it is changing our world and our economy, and we have to grapple with that. So how do we deal with that? The outcome of the artificial intelligence incentives are not yet written. That tonight is part of that conversation, and I think the potentially negative outcomes that are out there for artificial intelligence, we don't want to have our kids lead the charge and be on the front lines of the artificial intelligence as the negative incentives. Really towards the most lucrative arms race in history. I'm going to turn it over to Erica, who is one of the leaders of Lex Kids Be Kids. Actually, I can handle this.
Okay, Hi, I'm Erica Walsh. Thank you all for coming here tonight. So with all of what Jeff said, the great news is that we don't have to accept these outcomes. So families, educators, and policymakers around the country are pulling back. We are part of a wave and not the fringe. So here, families are waiting on smartphone adoption for their children, and 23 states have put together bell-to-bell phone-free school policies legislation, and school districts across the country are reining in technology in the classroom. Our neighbors in Cambridge are pushing to suspend screen time for K through second, and most notably, just 2 weeks ago, the nation's second largest school district in the country, the Los Angeles Unified School District, just approved a resolution to limit screen time use across the district. So all these measures are signaling a major shift is coming. And so much of this is parent-led organization throughout the country. And Katie and I are excited to share that Let Kids Be Kids is creating a chapter of Schools Beyond Screens in Winchester. And this is a national coalition of parents and educators advocating for safe, intentional, and evidence-based technology use in schools. Schools Beyond Screens is not anti-tech. It is, we want our children to learn how to use technology and not learn through technology. So we're really excited. If you're interested in learning more, there's a little flyer on your sheet, or please come talk to Katie and I after the program. Thanks.
Thank you, Erica. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for showing up tonight. We have over 100 people gathered here tonight around a shared curiosity. And we've freed ourselves from the isolation of digital walls, so let's all give ourselves credit and celebrate being here together in real life. I feel fortunate to be a member of such an engaged community. We have parents, teachers, administrators who all care deeply about our students. And students, thank you for being here tonight. We have some students from McCall and from the high school, and we'll offer them to come up after to share their perspectives. So what we do with our free time is a good indication of what we value. Thank you for prioritizing in-person connection, and thank you for coming to learn. In preparation for tonight's event, I spoke to my son, Teddy's 6th grade English teacher, Miss Rose, and she shared that students often ask, why do I have to learn this? Why should I write an essay if AI can do it for me? And so when I think of children at school, I imagine an environment that's filled with interaction, where they build deep relationships with classmates and teachers and have opportunity to develop social courage. I want students to feel challenged, knowing that learning happens at the point of friction. I want them to struggle and encode new ideas and then feel a sense of pride, accomplishment, and confidence in themselves and their ability to think and express themselves. We all know AI was not deliberately adopted by most schools, but it has arrived, and now we have to grapple with how it fits into our education system. As we navigate this, I hope we don't rob our students of their self-confidence. Let's remember that deep learning is born of human connection. Let's allow our children the time and space to develop critical thinking skills, creativity, collaboration, and the ability to communicate. AI is a great tool for experts who want to offload work and increase productivity. Domain expertise is necessary to evaluate the output of AI. So to conclude, let us allow schools to continue to be environments where real relationships are formed, where teachers share their interests and ignite passion in students, where students are allowed to build knowledge and expertise of their own, given that competence builds confidence. Finally, let us celebrate our connection with each other and allow our shared humanity to be our guiding light. Thank you. And now it's my privilege to introduce MIT professor Justin Reich. Eric and I were first made aware of Justin's work through his Teach Lab podcast, which we listened to with great interest. I recently finished his book, Failure to Disrupt, which I highly recommend. And Justin, we feel so privileged to have him here with us in the community tonight. He's one of the nation's experts on this topic that is so timely and relevant. And we would just like to invite Justin up to share his perspective. Thank you, Justin.
I started my career as a 9th grade world history teacher in 2003. I guess it would have been the summer of 2003. I was interviewing with Doug Jenke, who is the history department chair at the Noble and Greenough School. And he said, "Can you teach world history?" And I said, "No, but I promise I'll figure it out by September if you hire me." And they said, "All right, there's one other thing you need to know. Our 9th grade world history classroom is like a pilot classroom where we have a cart of laptops in the back corner, and Wi-Fi is in the room, and there are these blue and orange clamshell iBooks, which you have to be pretty old to remember, but they were probably the most beautiful computer that Apple produced, and we'd like you to use them every day." And I said, "You put a cart of bananas in the back corner of the classroom, and I'll use them every day. I really need this job." And he hired me, and I loved teaching there, and I loved teaching with these machines. So in the early 2000s, the world's museums, libraries, archives were rapidly digitizing primary sources. So when I, in the 1980s, 1990s, when I was a 7th grade US history student, we got 2 books at the beginning of class. One was a textbook, and the second was a primary source reader. It had 20 documents from the Mayflower Compact to a letter from a Birmingham jail, and that was the only primary sources that we would really read all year long. And here I was teaching in a classroom where I could have my students investigate anything. You know, you're like, well, we're studying the Harlem Renaissance. Oh, the Smithsonian has tens of thousands of song sheets from the Harlem Renaissance. You can each have your own primary source. You can each analyze them. Like, this is a magical environment to be doing teaching and learning in history. It always came with complexities. I've been thinking a lot about the idea that our learning technologies are like nested in a series of containers. So the thing that you want is inside a browser, that's inside an operating system, that's inside a device. These containers have always been a nuisance. Like in 2003, I'd be like, all right, you're gonna go up and you're gonna walk over to the cart and you're bring the computer back and maybe the battery is charged and maybe it's not. You turn on the computer, it's gonna take a few minutes to load. You gotta log into the school system. But by the time I could get them to like the British Museum webpage, we were pretty safe. We were like on pretty secure ground. One of the challenges that we have in education technology is that the containers are really getting worse. They were like kind of a nuisance before, and increasingly they're designed as heat-seeking missiles for our attention. I've been using the Windows operating system for pretty much as long as there's been a Windows operating system. And like the only thing I want to do is double-click on an icon and open a program. That's it. I want to like play a computer game or type a Word document. That's all I need it to do. And now that like there are pictures that show up and these notifications, it's asking me if I want to check the weather. I don't want to do any of that. I just want to open my machine, the program that I want to use. And so I think that shapes some of the challenges that schools are facing today. There are some pretty fabulous opportunities. Like if you put me back in a 9th grade world history classroom, it would be pretty hard for me to give up those archives, those museums, those government websites. I would be pretty loath to go back to only the printed resources that I could come up with in advance. There's some things that I can do, there's some historical thinking skills, some disciplinary historical skills that my students can develop that maybe I could translate just to paper, but it would be hard. Historians across the country use technologies to communicate and share their understandings. Like the way you be a historian now is you don't just write papers, but you make podcasts and you make presentations and you make posters and you share your understanding in a wide variety of multimedia. And I think I would be loath to give that up. But I think we need to be constantly investigating, is the pedagogical juice worth the technological squeeze? What is the best way that I can spend the moments that I have in the classroom with my students? What's the most rewarding work that I can have them do outside of class? And as devices change, as technology change, we should re-ask those kinds of questions. I think what I want to do, so I was an 9th grade history teacher, and then I started a technology consulting company called EdTech Teacher. It's very likely that many of your teachers, not many, at some point, there's some teachers in Winchester, in Arlington, in Cambridge, in Medford that have done professional learning about integrating technology from EdTech Teacher. I run a lab at MIT now called the Teaching Systems Lab, and essentially what I've done for the last 6 years is sort of help schools navigate a series of crises. Like, what should you do about the pandemic? What should you do about the arrival of AI? And that's what I do in my life. I want to try to sort of summarize 2 bodies of work that I've done. One is this book, Failure to Disrupt, which is basically a history of education technology from maybe like 1990 to 2020 when the book was published. And then we'll talk a little bit about AI and what we've learned specifically about that. Jeff alluded to the fact that people have made a series of insane promises about education technology. They go back a century. This is from Larry Cuban's book, Teachers and Machines, and there's a bunch of kids, you can't see it that well, who are huddled around a radio player that's about yay large, and it says, with radio, the underprivileged school becomes a privileged one. So for nearly 100 years, technologists have promised that new technologies will transform schools. These are just some of my favorites. This guy, Clayton Christensen, with Michael Horn, wrote a book in 2009 that said by 2019, 50% of all 6 through 12 courses would be online, they would cost us third as much to deliver, and they would have better learning outcomes. In 2012, higher education invented these massive open online courses. This guy, Sebastian Thrun, who built this thing called Udacity, said that there'll probably only be about 10 institutions in the world delivering higher education in 50 years, and we're hoping to be one of them. Sal Khan has this 2011 TED Talk which says, let's reinvent math class using videos. Let's have students sit individually in front of terminals, having algorithmically optimized lessons where each kid moves along at their own individual pace, and then like occasionally teachers come along and remediate groups of students or have advanced groups of students do projects and things like that, but the core sort of math lesson learning is through these videos. And then there is this guy who I think is maybe the most insane of all of them, Sugata Mitra. He got $1 million from TED in 2013, and he said, actually, you can just give kids laptops or internet-connected computers, and they can teach themselves anything. And then the pandemic happened, and there were a lot of kids at home with internet-connected laptops, and we can confirm that they cannot teach themselves anything. Part of my job has been to go to schools and try to explain why none of these things are going to happen. These are not realistic pronouncements about the future of schools. And also, there are perhaps targeted areas where technologies can really benefit student learning. Sometimes these people kind of get it. Millions of people have watched Sal Khan's 2011 TED Talk. Many, many fewer have read his 2019 interview with District Administrator Magazine, which is this tiny little magazine for superintendents. In between 2011 and 2019, he starts a school called the Khan Lab School. It costs $40,000 a year. He hires all the teachers he wants. He can select the students that he wants to. He tries to implement this mastery-based, personalized, technology-mediated model. It doesn't work. Now that I run a school, I see that some of this stuff is not as easy to accomplish compared to how it sounds theoretically. It's taken me and the Khan Academy longer to realize this, but not everyone can move to a mastery-based, self-paced model. More recently, we're seeing that if students put 30 minutes to an hour per week, or one class period per week, towards software-based, self-paced learning, students will see a 20 to 30% greater than the expected gain on state assessments. That's exciting because that's a dosage that's very doable in mainstream classrooms. So we should totally radically transform schools to maybe one day a week we should do practice problems. When I read that, I was like, oh, I've read that model before. Because the first place where that model was tested was in Pittsburgh in the 1990s by a colleague of mine named Ken Kadinger, who brought these giant, compact desktop computers into the Pittsburgh public schools, said, can we do 2 days a week of practice problems? And the teachers were like, no, we have stuff to do, but you can do 1 day a week of practice problems. And, it works pretty well, actually. That if you switch from 5 days a week of teaching to 4 days a week of teaching and 1 day a week of practice problems, it's a different rhythm and routine to the week, and there seems to be some evidence. I mean, he collected evidence in the 1990s that you get, outperform students in comparison classes by 15%. And that kind of result has been validated a number of different times. Khan Academy just had a study earlier this year in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences, which says if you can get people using the stuff about a half an hour a week, you can get some moderate but meaningful learning gains. It's about 1/10 of a standard deviation. If you know math, you're like, oh, that sounds kind of small. But actually, everything we do in schools is small. There's basically no intervention that we have that dramatically improves learning. Improving learning is a game of inches. You just do one little thing better today and one other little thing better next week and one other little thing better the week after that, and you get better. That's all you get. A huge problem with Khan Academy is that the vast majority of schools where it's implemented don't use it very much. That it's there, but it's not really embedded. So one lesson that I try to share with educators, with software developers, with other institutions all the time, is that technology developers are always hoping that you can just like download stuff onto kids' machines and it will transform the learning experience. But that's not what happens. The only time that we see benefits from new technologies is when communities change. Technologies are only as powerful as the communities that guide their use. So when you have teachers who go, oh, online practice problems could help. I'm going to look at the results of those online practice problems. I'm going to use them to inform my instruction the next week. I'm going to do research on how to do this better. I'm going to try a few different methods for improving it. I'm going to have principals and assistant superintendents come in my classroom and give me some feedback. That kind of thing can work. Airdropping stuff from the sky is very, very unlikely to work and improve learning. So sometimes I describe, and other colleagues have described sort of, I think I got this from Morgan Ames' book, The Charisma Machine, two stances that you'll hear towards education technology. One is that it's utterly transformative, and systems will be completely different in the future. Another is that new technologies are domesticated. Like schools take new technologies and go, you fit here. You might be able to be helpful for particular students in particular contexts and particular subjects and not in other contexts. And that actually we don't have to make like wild guesses about where those things might be most useful. We can look at past generations of technology and be like, so what did they do the last time we tried this? And the new things that we build are usually not that different. They're usually not that better. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that maybe AI is like, generative AI has existed for decades, that generative AI, large language models, as far as I can tell, it seems to be totally transforming software development. Like that is a thing that seems to be really, really different now than it was before. LLM-powered education technologies don't look to me super different than what we have before. There's some new capacities that get developed, some new things that are interesting, but it's not like we're in a completely different world. Which means you can sort of take any new technology and ask the questions, what's new? Like human beings, for as long as we've had digital computers, have tried to do teaching and learning stuff with them. Since you had computers the size of your living room, back in the 1960s, teachers and computer scientists partnered to try to teach people with computers. It's one of the computers were all built in universities. And so the people looking around, well, how can I use this to teach my students? So we, at this point, have sort of 60 years of practice with this stuff. And we know some things about how well they work and in what contexts. One way that I've classified education technologies is that they're basically three kinds of things. And you can figure out which they are by asking a question, who sequences learning activities? So there's some education technologies which are like, somebody is going to put together a series of things for us to do. That's like a massive open online course. That's like, like an online course you might have taken somewhere. Online courses are awesome. Instructor-paced learning experience are awesome for super motivated people. Like if you really want to learn a thing, these are great environments for learning stuff. They tend not to work well for people who are not super motivated to learn stuff, which turns out to be almost all of us. So for the vast majority of things we teach, we're not good at self-directed learning. This is why like Ben Franklin was an autodidact, and he was a very special guy because he could teach himself with anything he had. Sometimes we call the kids who are good at this, kids who could learn from a ham sandwich. Like there are folks out there, I teach at MIT, all of our students can learn from a ham sandwich. Like we give them anything, they'll figure it out. But the vast majority of students are not like that. Algorithm-guided learning at scale is when a machine somehow evaluates some work product that you do, and based on its evaluation, gives you the next work product to practice. There are a couple of areas in which we have some pretty good evidence that this works pretty well. My colleagues at Worcester Polytechnic Institute have this program called assessments. You do your homework in the evening, you get a little feedback on it, your teacher gets a report in the morning that says these are the problems that your students got right, these are the problems your student got wrong, you can focus on the ones that they got wrong. They've done 2 huge randomized control trials in Maine and in North Carolina, where you see about 0.2 standard deviations of gains. That's like students at the 50th percentile moving to the 58th percentile, which in education terms is pretty darn good. Disproportionately benefits lower performing students. It's better for kids who are having a harder time with math. I think this thing's pretty good. it seems to work best. We have the best evidence for it in 8th and 9th grade. Each of these big randomized controlled trials costs like $5 million. We don't do a ton of them. They're super expensive. The ones that we do in elementary school seem not to work as well. We don't have as good results with younger kids. We don't actually really have very many results at all for 11th and 12th graders. A lot of times in our research base, you kind of have to extrapolate for things which we've studied really closely to other kinds of things. They also almost only work in math. People haven't really gotten them to work in science, haven't really gotten them to work in history. There's some stuff around this where if you're teaching kids some of the basic building blocks of reading, maybe they work okay. We definitely haven't built stuff that helps people read to learn. So from kindergarten to the pre-K through 3rd grade, we're basically teaching kids to learn to read, and then from 3rd grade onward, we teach them to read to learn. And we don't have good tools that do this. Peer-guided learning, I bet all of you do. I bet all of you hop online to figure out how to beat a level in a video game, or to do your hair and makeup, or because you like coding or robotics or something related to profession, your gardening, your snowblower boat. You're always going online to get learning resources, and you know that your students are, for certain kinds of things, insanely good at this because you've seen them build these like giant roller coasters in Minecraft, or my daughter is like super into doing her hair. It's like a great passion of hers to have her hair look great every day, and she uses Pinterest and she uses YouTube apps, she uses all those kinds of things. In areas of really high motivation, these kinds of things are incredibly powerful learning networks. It's probably the case that we would really like our students to be really good at engaging in these learning networks. Like lots of people find great satisfaction in their personal lives and their careers engaging in these kind of online learning networks. It's almost impossible to get them to work in schools. In schools, we emphasize individual learning, we emphasize learning in a fixed period of time. There are all kinds of reasons why really cool peer learning environments don't work that well in schools. So, when you see schools adopting new AI kinds of things, large language model kinds of things, you don't have to be like, what is this thing? Where did it come from? It's very likely a modest adaptation of one of these kinds of things. And in some cases, a larger adaptation, in some cases, a small one, but you can kind of make some guesses about how well these things will work. Here are 3 things that are like good bets for the entire history of education technology. So first, when teachers get access to new technologies, they use them to extend existing practices. This is a finding from the 1984 Apple Classrooms of Tomorrow project. When you give teachers new technologies, they'll be like, holy smokes, I can project my lecture notes on a acetate projector. Wait a minute, I can put them on a PowerPoint slide. It's the same practice. When you take an old practice and put it in a new format, you shouldn't expect different outcomes. If we take worksheets and we make them digital worksheets, they're not better. It's just a worksheet. It takes quite a bit of time, support, coaching, experimentation, practice to get to the point where new technologies lead to meaningful, important new practices. If I was talking to schools about their technology investments, a big question I would be asking them is really, how much time are you willing to put behind this? And if they say, oh, we're doing 7 different kinds of professional development this year, but this new piece of technology is one of them, I'd be like, that is unlikely to work super well from what we know. You're just going to take the new technology and do whatever you're doing before, and it's not going to get a lot of improvements. And then if you talk to school communities and they're like, no, we're in on this. We really think there's some good evidence this can help, and we're going to spend some time really trying to make this work. That gives me more confidence, oh, all right, so we're working together on this thing. There's a community initiative here. That's more compelling to me. New technologies disproportionately benefit the affluent, and new technologies are only as powerful as the communities that guide their use. These are 3 things that you can go to pretty consistently. All right. So then in November of 2022, ChatGPT is released. People have been working with large language models before that, but this is the first time it's sort of widely available to the public. When new technologies are available, one thing I do is think about what did we learn from before? What are the lessons from past technology generations that we can apply? And then I think the second thing, which is extremely valuable to do, is to listen really closely to students and teachers. What is the experience of the people who are using these tools in the classroom every day? We're actually not super good at a nation at doing that. There are zillions of people going around making pronouncements. Some of them have very powerful financial incentives, as Jeff described, to describe these technologies as transformative. Like some of the people who are most enthusiastic about technology, I promise you, are true believers. Like they're not doing this to make a bunch of money. They just really believe that these things at some point should help. But I think one of the most important things we can do is listen to folks. So we interviewed 120 teachers and students from across the country. Our first interview question to them was, how is your year going? So not like, what do you think of AI? What are you doing differently? Just like, what context are you in? What's going on where you are? There are 13,000 school districts and 130,000 schools in the country, and they're really, really different. There are tiny one-room schoolhouses. There are giant comprehensive high schools. There are places that have made really substantial investments in education technology and believe that they've seen important gains from that. There are places where technology fell from the sky during the pandemic and they have no idea why it's still there. These kinds of differences matter. There are lots of teachers we talk to in schools that are not super like Winchester, who if you ask them how their year is going, they won't talk at all about AI. They'll talk about the fact that their kids are hungry. They'll talk about the fact their kids are homeless, that they can't afford substitute teachers, that their kids aren't showing up. In a huge number of schools across the country, chronic absenteeism is a major problem. In more affluent places, it was pretty easy to get people talking about AI. It was a disruptive arrival. All of the technologies that I talked to you about before, for the most part, when they show up in schools, it's because somebody makes a plan for them to show up in schools. Like no 8th grader has ever dragged their own smartboard into the classroom. Typically, technology ends up in schools through procurement processes. Like a bunch of sensible people get together. Hopefully it's like a few teachers and a few administrators. Maybe there's a parent or a student involved, less likely, but it would be good. And they go, oh, here's some kind of problem that we have, and here's some vendor who says they have a solution or a set of vendors that has a solution to that problem. Let's go ahead and try it. And they pilot things and they do some experiments. They put it in a few classrooms and they use it widely. The procurement process does not prevent stupid things from happening, sadly. So actually, any of you who worked in environments with smart boards over the last 2 decades know that we spent millions of dollars across the country investing in those things. Even worse, we spent hundreds of thousands of hours of teacher professional learning time showing people how to use them. And as far as we can tell, they had zero effect on student learning. None. Total waste of time. They probably didn't hurt kids unless they like fell on top of them or something like that. But every dollar that we spent on smart boards could have been spent on something that helped improve learning. And as far as I'm concerned, so all of those dollars are wasted. So we asked students and teachers what's going on. I'm gonna have to play this here. This is a pretty typical kind of response. Sarah Falls is an English and journalism teacher in San Francisco. She's in Abraham Lincoln High School in San Francisco Unified.
What would your guess be of how many were using AI in a way that would make you uncomfortable?
Oh. This feels really hard. This is part of the concern, is like, then you just become a paranoid person. You distrust every single thing your students give you. You start to kind of move through the world with this sense of like, everybody's cheating, nobody's doing the work. I can't trust anybody. And that is a terrible, terrible place to be. I really love my students, and I really want to believe that they're good and ethical people who care about their learning and their process. And then I hear myself being like, I'm pretty sure everybody is cheating. Everybody's using AI to cheat, and I don't like that I believe that about myself. So then I sort of temper it by saying, oh, well, they're probably not, or they're probably just using Grammarly. But it's hard to know. I think I'm not giving you an answer because I don't like what the answer is, which is I think the majority of kids are using AI to cheat.
Yeah, so it's totally unprecedented to have a technology that arrived in schools at this speed. It's unprecedented to have a technology that arrived at schools without going through this procurement process. And there probably aren't too many things for whom the negative effects of the sort of instant negative effects of the technology were so widely apparent to teachers. Way too many students in way too many schools were using these tools to not think. to have the machines do the thinking for them, and some vast amount, you can imagine that like teachers over the last decades have built zillions of different exercises, some of which were stupid and lousy, and some of which were great, to have students do thinking routines that would make them smarter. And we invented a machine that can do all of those thinking routines for students a lot of times in ways that are like more or less indistinguishable to teachers, so they can't tell. This is a huge challenge. This is one of the central things that schools are wrestling with. Even as teachers recognize, like, man, this stuff is so useful for different kinds of things. Like, probably our students will use it in all kinds of ways in their future life. Like, we've got to figure out some way of preparing them. But this is one signature challenge. We talked, you can go to teachlabpodcast.com and listen to the homework machine. Let me just give you one other, maybe a little longer story, but I thought you'd want to listen to this one. This is from some third grade teachers who are from this school in Iowa called Winterset, Iowa, who are pretty excited about using AI in their classroom. And here's one of the exercises that they were really excited about. They use a tool called Magic School to create characters that students can interact with. And one of the characters they made was a butterfly scientist.
To, in essence, talk back to them and answer their questions.
So one example I saw of this is they were doing an assignment that was about monarch butterflies, and specifically how those populations are decreasing, right? And so they're looking into ecology and how to preserve populations, and they had this character chatbot that was playing the role of an ecologist. And so they could ask questions to the researcher, and they would give them answers or link out to websites that have good information, and then the students would take what they learned.
Milkweed.
Okay, milkweed for who?
For caterpillars. Caterpillar.
Okay, caterpillar is a word that always tricks me up.
And then share that back with the researcher as if they were scientists following along. And one thing I thought was really interesting, sort of seeing the students interacting with Magic School and with this chatbot is, they all have their Chromebooks open, and a lot of the students choose to speak directly to the chatbot.
What do monarch butterflies need to survive? It sends when you click that button at the bottom. And we can have it read aloud, and then length shorter or longer.
So you could hear that student sort of speaking into their microphone, and then it goes into a transcription tool that then writes it all out, and then they can send it to the researcher. And I sort of asked Mrs. Bean about that, like, why were so many students speaking directly into the microphone? And she was saying that for some of them, it's a really easy way for them to organize their thoughts, especially for students who might struggle with writing.
That was like my big thing, was making the research and other things accessible to some students, because some students have a hard time even writing a complete sentence, but they have thoughts that they can get out. And sometimes that's not possible unless someone's sitting right there and helping them. But with Magic School Research Assistant, they can say it in, they can be independent.
And what I quickly discovered is that it's this accessibility part of Magic School that is really exciting and really useful for Mrs. Dinkla and Mrs. Bean. And I think
so they're teaching an environment that probably has a pretty wide range of reading and writing proficiencies in the third grade. Probably quite a few students who are in the third grade who can't actually read at a third grade level, and they're in a science class, and they want those students to learn about butterflies. And there's a bunch of things you could do to learn about butterflies. You could read aloud books around butterflies. You could find a whole set of different resources. And, kids who can't read yet could watch videos about butterflies. Kids who can read could read books aloud in libraries. And the thing that they were experimenting with was, could they use large language models to have students do the kind of individual investigations orally that we would be more likely to expect them to be able to do on the web or in a library or in an encyclopedia in the 6th grade or the 7th grade or things like that. All of our collective jobs is to try to figure out, what do we think about that? What predictions would we have about how that would affect young people's development? These teachers, their prediction is something like, I want to be able to engage my kids in science at really young ages, and I think I can get them engaging in sort of scientific question asking at a much younger age than I would be able to do without this kind of resource. There are other people who would look at that and go, children talking to machines is bad. We do not want to have young people communicating with things that are not humans that pretend to be human beings. Like people who are in the 3rd grade are still developing a theory of mind. They're still developing their understanding of what other people are like. And none of us, my view is that none of us conclusively know what the outcomes of these kinds of experiments should be. And I think it's incredibly important for parent communities and other communities to get together and to give their education systems feedback about these kinds of experiments. I would consider myself pretty skeptical of them. But also sometimes I think, man, I'm super glad Winterset is trying this. If you said that you were doing it in Arlington, I'd be like, I'm not so keen on that, but it's kind of nice that someone is doing it. And so, all right, so here is the advice that I give to the educators who work in your schools when I get to talk with them. Schools have to do something. You cannot proceed with business as usual on the basis of these new technologies being developed. Like the assignments that we have developed, the class routines that we have developed don't work the same way anymore. We do not know what to do. This is like the number one thing that I try to communicate to educators. Educators have a wonderful quality of seeking best practices. Journalists, I'm learning, because I've been talking to a bunch of them in the last year, have a wonderful quality of seeking best practices. This is a good intuition. Like, if your school is not doing a great job teaching kids how to read, you should not invent reading instruction from first principles. You should not be like, let's try some things. No, we've studied this for 60 years. We know how to teach your kids to read. You should do the things that work and not do the things that don't work. We can't do that with large language models because we don't know. We don't know what the good practices are. This is, to me, a funny story, and whether or not it's funny to you, we'll find out in a minute or two. I wrote this paper with some colleagues from RAND who do terrific surveys about students. We did some teacher surveys. They did some student and principal surveys. And you have a bunch of recommendations at the end of these papers. And the lead author, Chris, was like, one of our recommendations is that trusted sources like states should give guidance on what good AI practice looks like. And I was like, Chris, we can't say that. The states have no idea. Like, State Department of Educations haven't the foggiest idea what to tell schools to do. None of us do. I know this because I spend my life, I am the person who's free to spend their life studying this, and I know we do not know what to do. And Chris is like, we just got to say something, so this is what we're going to say. And I'm like the 7th author there, so I just go with it and whatever. But a couple weeks later, Massachusetts published its AI guidelines, and its AI guidelines, for the most part, are in the structure of key questions for district teams to discuss. So Chris is like, go to the states and they'll tell you what to do. And Massachusetts is like, districts, here are some things you might consider. Discuss whether your district is using a consistent definition or framework to guide AI literacy. Like, does the Winchester superintendent know what a good definition of AI literacy is? No, they have no idea. None of us do. Like, if we knew what a good definition was for AI literacy, the state would write it down and tell us what it is. They then have these action steps to get started. This page looks sort of reasonable, but there's actually 134 of these action steps. So anyway, go to your local school principal and say, do you have time to do 134 additional things, and watch their head explode. All right. We don't know what to do, and you might be like, let's just put our best foot forward and make some good guesses. And you'd be like, actually, our early guesses about new technologies are very often wrong. Sometimes they're sort of, I gave you the smartboard example as benignly wrong guess, sort of benign, wasted tons of money, but didn't actively harm students. But there are examples where we really teach students the wrong thing for extraordinary long periods of time. Google was founded in 1995. The first peer-reviewed research that gave a good basis for strategies for sorting truth from fiction on the web was published in 2019. So about 25 years of going from, here's this new technology for sharing information, to this is a pretty good way of teaching students how to evaluate information online. In between 1995 and 2019, we taught nonsense. So I personally, as a 9th grade world history teacher, I don't know if any of you were taught things like, When you go to a website, you should look at the website for markers of credibility. Like sometimes there are these checklists, like the CRAP test that you should use, that you shouldn't trust Wikipedia, that you should trust .org and .edu websites, over.com websites. All of that is wrong. You can give that advice to super smart students and watch them come to take a long time to come to spurious conclusions about websites. The most important part of this study is that if you give these same challenges to fact checkers at newspapers and magazines, like if you give sort of information literacy challenges to fact checkers at newspapers and magazines, they do it right all of the time very quickly, and they don't use any of the techniques that we taught students to use for decades. They use a whole other set of strategies that are called lateral reading, which I could explain more to you, but it's not that interesting. I mean, it is interesting, and you should learn all these things, but let's not do it now. The students, so in this particular challenge, about 20% of students get the answer right, but they're not like random students, they're Stanford freshmen. They're like the smartest students in the country. Sam and his colleagues thought that tenured award-winning historians would be another expert group, but actually they're not either. They're not particularly good at these kinds of tasks. So we taught tens of millions of students provably incorrect ways to sort truth from fiction on the web. And for the most part, actually, we're still doing it. Like if you go to your State Department website, of education website, you'll probably see something about lateral reading as regards fact checking, but if you go into classrooms and see what students are actually learning, they're probably still learning these provably wrong methods because once something permeates the education system, it's really hard to get it out. Like the education system exists to conserve society. Like that is the thing that we do is we sort of reproduce ourselves over and over again, which is good. Conserving democracy is good. Conserving faulty web literacy practices is bad. I don't know, the U.S. Department of Labor just put out an AI literacy framework, and I was like, this is made up. You can't possibly know these things yet. I know that there's not research that validates these practices. If you were to say, does the research that informs this look more like the stuff that informs the CRAP test or more like the stuff that informs lateral reading? It obviously looks more like the research that we know now is wrong. I mean, I'm not saying 100% of it wrong. Maybe some of it's used. Maybe the whole thing is right. Who knows? But the teachers do not have access to good guidance yet. Here's another way I sort of frame this. I went to this is from DeepMind in London, like the people who make Gemini, and I was there in November, and I found every engineer I could, and I said, do you know how to teach a junior engineer to code with a Copilot? Can you teach someone to take one of your LLM-based coding tools and be a better engineer with it? Which is an important question, because code generated with Copilots can be worse. They're particularly good at solving small problems in ways that break things in larger systems. And it's quite possible that if you have a junior engineer using a Copilot their whole career, they never become a senior engineer. They don't get good at stuff over time. So I asked all kinds of engineers, and every single one of them told me no. We do not know at Google how to train a junior engineer to code with a Copilot. Google has billions of dollars at stake answering this question. It will also not be forever that this is the case. One day, 4 years from now, 8 years from now, 14 years from now, you'll walk into Google People Operations and be like, how do you teach a junior engineer to code with a Copilot? And they'll say, oh, you do this and this and this, and not this and this and this. And then, computer science education researchers will come crawling out of universities across the country, and they'll grab that professional knowledge, and they'll say, okay, this part we can teach a 4th grader, and this part we can teach a 7th grader, and this part we can teach an 11th grader, and the rest of it's too complicated, and Google, you've got to figure out how to train junior engineers to do that. And then we will have a computer science curriculum for teaching all kinds of people how to code with Copilots. Until that happens, what is a 7th grade computer science teacher supposed to do? Their only option really is to kind of make stuff up. If the disciplines and professions haven't figured this out, it is extremely unlikely that effective coding practices with Copilots are going to be invented by a 7th grade computer science teacher somewhere. They're wonderful at all kinds of things, but this is maybe not their sweet spot. Should they let students play with Copilots? I'm pretty enthusiastic about that. I mean, if you're sitting in a computer science class and the world of software engineering is being totally transformed by these tools, it's very easy for me to come up with all kinds of reasons why young people should play with those tools. Can we yet build a sort of systematic curriculum about that? I'm sure we can't. I'm sure if we try to do that too soon, we're going to do what we did with web literacy and other things where we invent a bunch of stuff which is not that useful. What should you advocate that your 7th grade computer science teachers in the Winchester Middle School do? I have no idea. You should be in conversation with them. I think you should talk to students. I think you should talk with those computer science teachers. I think the more that they tell you that they have some really thoughtful plans for designing and conducting those experiments, the more I would be like, that might be something worth thinking about. And the more they're like, we just found this thing online, and now we're going to teach them to code Copilot. They're like, that doesn't sound like a well thought out plan with a lot of support and things like that. I mean, that's how I think about these things, and you all will advocate for whatever you decide you want to advocate for. One of the number one piece of advice that I'm trying to give to educators is that if you don't know what to do, you just have to be honest about that. This is not fun for teachers. This is not expertise is a thing that we value and like to hang on to and share, and it's part of our authority and professional, sense of identity and stuff like that. But if you don't know what to do, you just got to tell people we don't know what to do. We don't know the best way to integrate these tools into our instruction. I was on a panel with the MIT computer science chair, and the discussion changed, how are we going to change the MIT software engineering curriculum? And his answer was, I don't know. We don't know yet. We have not figured this out. So I think starting with that, we don't have the answers to this yet. And then maybe I'll skip to the end of this. I'll just say that in the stuff that we write, we try to be super clear with people that there are no best practices, there are only hypotheses. A guidebook of tying knots will show you exactly how to tie the knots the correct way. A guidebook on AI in schools in 2025 can't possibly do that because we don't know what the knots are, let alone how to tie them. We can show you some interesting things that people are doing, but we don't know if they're any good yet. This will not be the case forever. Eventually, we will have answers to these questions. It's going to take way longer than teachers want. I was on a panel with a superintendent outside of Pittsburgh, and I was saying, these things take 10, 20 years. She was like, they cannot take 10 years. I was like, that's not exactly how science works. You get to pick how long the discovery takes. It takes a while. So schools need to experiment. What they're doing right now won't keep working. What should those experiments look like? Here's 4 categories of possible experiments, and these might be ways for you to think about some of your advocacy. So all social scientists do when they have a problem is they make a 2x2. So on the x-axis would be the depth of engagement with AI. How much AI stuff do you think you should be doing? Then I think another important thing for you all to think about is that schools are not homogeneous places. We teach all kinds of different stuff. Some of that stuff is sequenced. Some of that stuff is just sampled out of a canon. Some of that stuff is pretty random because it's the interests of the idiosyncratic teachers that your kids happen to have this year. Some of this stuff is central to our curriculum. So you can imagine the periphery is on the bottom and the core, the stuff that's whatever you want it to be, most tested, most important, is at the top. So then you can get kind of 4 of these boxes. So there are going to be some schools that are we're going to the cloister. Everywhere in the school, we're going to have as little AI as possible. You're going to still have to change your practices because you can't just be hey, kids, please don't use AI. You got to turn to blue books. You got to proctor, Princeton just after 133 years announced they were going to start proctoring their exams. You got to change a bunch of stuff. You probably have to teach a bunch less. If you're going to take your students and have them do all their writing in class, then you got to go to the English curriculum and be okay, we got to make it about half as long because we're going to spend half our time writing in class, which in 2020 or 2010 would have seemed like an incredibly stupid way to spend our time together. But it might very well be the best way to spend our time together in 2026. Another thing that you can do is be all AI all the time. This is the future. Let's just have students go bananas. Let's give them way harder challenges, things that they couldn't possibly accomplish without AI, and see how they do. Neil Ferguson calls those things the cloister and the starship. And there are other options too. So one option I call Party on the Beach is find weird parts of the curriculum and go bananas there. In one of our Teach Lab episodes, we interview a film teacher in Santa Ana, California, and he's all AI all the time. He says, my students love making films. I don't have to worry about them replacing the important parts of thinking with AI because they love the important parts of thinking. What AI is going to help them do is do the stupid part of filmmaking faster and do the cooler part more. He could be wrong, but that's an interesting bet. There are a handful of teachers that are also experimenting with things what if we find really targeted ways of using AI that are central to the curriculum? We interviewed a Spanish teacher who one of the exercises she wants to do is have students do online research in Spanish language websites. Well, if the kids can't read the websites, they just translate them to English. That is not like a super good use of their time. So she taught them how to take Spanish language websites and keep them in Spanish, but make the Lexile level simpler. Is that a good idea? I have no idea, but it's kind of a neat thing to sort of play around with and experiment. You all, as a community, might start saying to yourselves, like, in the next 3 or 4 years, which of these clusters seems most exciting to you? You might go and talk to the leaders of the Winchester schools and say, which of these clusters seem more exciting to you? A really hard thing about education is that we will probably find 10 years from now that there's not one of these things which is actually better. We make all kinds of schools in the United States. We make project-based learning schools and no excuses charter schools and Catholic schools and comprehensive high schools and VOTEC schools and a zillion different kinds of schools. And some of them are fabulous and some of them are lousy. And it's not like the no excuses charter schools on average are better than the project-based learning schools. They're a great and lousy version of these things. St. John's College, which has a great books curriculum, is going to be a cloister school. They'll probably keep being a great cloister school because that's what they do. There's going to be some universities that go full Starship, and a bunch of them are going to do a terrible job, and their students aren't going to learn things that they need to do, and some of them are going to nail it. And they're going to have kids who are really well prepared for complex, challenging futures using AI. We might decide that, you know, it's easier to think about K through 5 as more of a cloister kind of space, that our Starship experiences should be more in the 11th grade, in the 12th grade. And, you know, we may find out some years from now that, like, the folks in Winterset who are playing with AI with 3rd graders, that there's some real benefits that they can get there. I mean, there's certainly going to be some things like translating documents into multiple languages that for sure are going to be helpful. So that doesn't tell you what to do, but it tells you about the kinds of experiments you might like to try. Whatever you try, singular steps are not going to improve instruction. So if any school that bans phones, any school that bans screens, if after you ban the screens, the instruction is boring and lousy, it's not going to help. What helps is long periods of investment into finding lots of different small ways of improving instruction over time. I think there are good reasons to believe that, say, banning phones from schools has the potential to support a process of improving instruction. If all you do is ban the phones, you're not going to see a lot of improvement. If you ban the phones and you use that newfound human connection to build community, to improve instruction, to build relationships, to create more mentorship, I think you'll see better outcomes from schools. But just like the education, when I go and visit the education technology people, I'm like, if you airdrop this stuff from the sky, it's not going to work. That's not how schools improve. And so now I'm sort of field testing this message to the maybe we shouldn't have so much technology in schools people, is the opposite is also true. If you rip this stuff out, it's not going to be magically better. What makes schools better is long-term, shoulder-to-the-wheel investments in improving instruction. Okay, that was the last thing that I wanted to say to you, and now we will do whatever our hosts tell us that we should do.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Justin. We just wanted to invite a few special members from our audience to come join us up at the front for the Q&A panel. So our newly elected school committee member, John Belair, high school student Phoebe, who's a sophomore at Winchester High, and Miss Rose, our middle school English teacher. Oh, Emily. Okay, Emily. Justin, I'm going to give this to you to lead the Q&A.
Great.
But if you want to ask our panel,
Yeah, let's see if we can discuss some things together. What are some questions that folks have?
I have one question actually for you to start, and I'd love to hear your views as well, any and all of you actually. One is personal question, how old is your daughter? What grade?
15 and 12, 10th and 7th.
So if you were, not like my question, but if right now you were to decide how much technology was in their classroom every day, if AI was allowed, and there was a gun to your head, based on all that you know, which you clearly know a lot, and I know that you said you took years to figure out, what would you do?
I will give you my answer, but let's hear from these folks first. What do you guys think?
Do you want to start? Thoughts on how much? Okay.
Me personally, I've seen some of my teachers, they heavily rely on AI for creating their assignments. And to students, that kind of feels unfair because we're always kind of told not to use AI because it's not, not morally correct. So that the balance kind of feels a little off, like how much AI students should be using and how much AI adults should be using. So me personally, I do not think AI should be very heavily used within classrooms because that kind of defeats the purpose of learning. We come to school to learn and to improve ourselves, but with AI is doing the learning and we aren't really improving as a whole. And when people start to use AI, they kind of get into the mindset of, oh, I can bypass what my teachers are trying to make me learn by just plugging this into like ChatGPT, for example. And that kind of just, like the students don't benefit from that and neither do the teachers. And the teachers also have a new worry that they have to constantly think about, like whether their students are actually doing the assignments themselves or if they're just using AI to do it. So.
I'd say that my answer varies depending on the grade level for students. I think we hear a lot about the need to prepare students for post-secondary education, for the workforce, and that in a digital age, those digital literacy skills are very important. So I think there can be a role, in high schools using educational technology a little bit more, whereas in some of the younger grades, and I think probably the biggest thing that ed tech and AI, Gen AI in particular, won't be able to replace, is the personal connection and those social emotional skills. So as much as we can make time and space for those in the earlier years as well as the later years, I think we'll be better off, but I don't have a super specific number of hours per grade. I think there's a balance that we'll need to strike, and I definitely would want to see less use in some of the younger grades, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, are there any other Winchester educators in here tonight? Okay. Hey, great. Go you. All right. Because I was told by several of my supervisors to say that I am speaking on behalf of myself and not the district. So I just want to make this clear. So when I started teaching at McCall 13 years ago, the year after we became a bring your own device school, and we were told that this was going to be the silver bullet that would cause, deplete all those inequities we see between the diverse learners that we have in Winchester. I teach a wide range of kids with so many different ability levels, and computers were going to make everything better. And that didn't happen. And so I've been doing a lot more learning lately on pulling back on technology, and it's so amazing to me talking to math teachers about all the learning that their students are doing, and I'm becoming increasingly convinced that it's because it's pen and paper, and it's because of a teacher sitting next to them and helping them, and it's not a video teaching the kids, and it's not kids plugged into Chromebooks all working independently, not talking to each other. It's because it's relational. And if you look back on the good experiences in your schooling, you're not thinking about oh, that was a really interesting computer game my teacher made us play. You're thinking that was a teacher who really cared about my learning. So my hope is that more teachers will start to go back to basics while still implementing best practices. Yeah.
So my 7th grader goes to the Ottoson Middle School, which is among suburban schools, a school having a pretty tough time. I actually think it's on something of an upward trajectory, but you would have pretty common conversation with parents what is your kid going to do for middle school, as in how are you going to get them not to go to Ottoson. Our kids have had okay experiences at Ottoson. I mean, I'll tell you one funny story that in the 8th grade, my daughter was telling me about, like, she just knew a lot about television. And she was like, I'm on my third watch through of How I Met Your Mother. And I was like, then I just started doing the math in my head. Like, I know when we let you watch television, I know you, like, she's like, oh, I watch in school sometimes. I was like, why are you watching in school? She's like, I don't know, I do my work, I help some other kids, and then there's not much to do. And I was like, oh, well, how many episodes do you watch a week? She's like, I don't know, 6 or 8 or something like you have 5 hours a week, like one full day a week is watching television? I'm like, well, I'm glad you're picking good television and not just scrolling YouTube. So if the Audison told me, like, schools can't get better at very many things at once. And I would really doubt that it would be a great strategy for the things for Audison to get better at to have a whole lot to do with technology. I think the things that they probably ought to work on are improving other sort of instructional and organizational components of the school. If Adela doesn't graduate from Arlington High School with some kind of chance to mess around with AI, I personally, as a parent, would be disappointed. I think there should be somewhere in her 4 years there, probably somewhere in the core curriculum that she can't miss, because I think every kid should probably have an experience like that. But if you told me, like, we're only going to do it in, like, certain places and they have to opt into those places and electives and stuff like that, then I would personally be fine with that too. But also one thing that actually is good about Arlington is they are pretty good about choosing instructional initiatives to work on, and I've watched them do this for 15 years. And if they told me, like, we're really trying to get better at having students reason from evidence, and it doesn't have anything to do with AI, and that's just what we're working on for the next year or two, I would be like, yep, do that. And like any school that tells you they have some coherent plan to get better at one or two things, like, that is usually the best strategy. Like schools are so complicated, they usually can't get better at more than a couple of things at once. So there's lots of, those are my answers, but it doesn't mean it has to be your. I actually don't know much about the Winchester Public Schools, and and I don't know about your families, and I don't know about your values. Like, there's not a correct answer to these things, but you should be thinking about what you think is most important for your kids as they're growing up, and for the kids of your neighbors, and advocating for the things you believe in, whether or not they align with my own beliefs. Okay, good.
So if schools only improve incrementally, very small amount, and we took a big kind of dive and regressed in terms of a lot of things because of technology, is it your position that we're only going to get out of it very incrementally, even though we took this huge step back?
Yes. Sorry. There are no good news. Yeah, I think, people have deaf opinions. I think it's very unlikely that it is the school adoption of technology that is in the United States that is directly related to decreasing scores. I think it's quite possible, although these things are really hard to measure, that the widespread access that kids have to screens across their whole lives is particularly responsible for declining literacy rates. Your kids are in school for about 1,000 hours a year, and they're out of school for about 5,000 hours. So the experiences they have out, in those 5,000 hours have an enormous influence over their experiences. Yeah, I mean, I wish that there were ways. It's not that schools don't get better. A fun thing to do sometime is see if you can find all the articles you can find, mostly from 2022 and 2023, about schools that were the first to have their test scores come back up to their pre-pandemic averages. And see what the principals in those schools or superintendents say. And I think almost every one of those articles has the same theme, which is there is no one thing that we did. We did 100 things better, one at a time, a couple days, 10 things better, little bits and pieces, things like that. Yeah, I think recovering literacy losses is going to be a generational challenge. Almost assuredly no. But the only thing that we get to do in schools is have small improvements, like shoulder to the wheel. When you stand back over a long period of time, we used to send kids to school in the United States sometimes for 8 years. Now we spend, then we sent them to school for 12 years. Then we sent them to school, quite a few of them, for 16 years. And those things mattered. We used to have almost no services for students with special needs, and then we passed the American with Disabilities Act, and the whole thing is a mess, and it doesn't work, and there's all kinds of problems, but students with special needs get more services than they did in the 1960s. Like, these things take a long time, but they're worth working on for a long time, too.
Hi, I'm actually a 9th grade world history teacher. And I teach 11th grade juniors, US. In Needham, I too am only speaking on behalf of myself, not the public schools of Needham. I live in Arlington. I tutor a lot of the kids who go to Audison, and mixed bag for sure. I am so torn. You know, on the one hand, like, yeah, I mean, I had to stop listening to your podcast when I was listening to it, because I would be listening to it while I was making my lunch for the next day, right before I meditated, and like, I would be so keyed up, I had to find another time to listen to it. You know, yeah, I mean, the first, you know, little piece you played, I don't want to be a cop. Like, that is the number one thing that I, like, whenever, I've already had drama with high schoolers when I was in high school. Like, if I've got drama with kids, like, I'm doing something wrong. You know, like, whatever, it's not that serious. Like, I'm not trying, like, the most meaningful experience I had was when I was a new teacher, and my mentor teacher was talking to me after school, and a kid was taking a test, and we finished before she did, and he turned to this kid and he said, "Leave it on my desk when you're done and just lock the door." And we're walking down the hall, and I said, "Aren't you worried she's gonna cheat?" And he said, "So what? I hope she feels really good about her A." And I was like, oh my God, yes, right, okay. Another teacher told me, you know, you can cheat your whole way through med school. I'd hate to be your first patient. Right, yes. And now I'm sitting there, so I don't want to write excellent thinking on a paper because I don't know if it was a student's thinking. Like, I don't want to do the best thing I do, which is make the kids feel good about their thinking, because I don't know if it's their thinking, and I hate it. The best thinking they do is out of school on their own at 10:30 at night with a stack of papers around them trying to get this evidence to match this thesis. Like, that's thinking. I listened, somebody at the beginning said, what, like, where frictions, think about friction and learning, whatever, like, that's thinking. And I also don't want to do blue books. You can't do that kind of thinking in school with blue books in an 80-minute period. You just can't. And I've created incredible units using AI. I built my kids, Jeff knows, I built my kids an incredible treehouse using AI. Like, it is this remarkable tool. And I mean, you're right. We don't know what we don't know, full stop. I have an idea that in 3 years, instead of doing a classroom norms conversation at the beginning of the year, I want to do a, like, thinking with AI conversation, and we iterate commands to give a class GPT that's our custom GPT that we then iterate who can come up with the best response based on the best prompt. How do we engineer prompt? Because I'm realizing, like, I'm a teacher, I give people instructions for a living, so I can make AI do all kinds of things, you know? My question, that was a long-winded introduction, I literally just was reading a kid's work, and I was like, GPT-0, but I can't prove GPT-0. Revision history, they can drip it in. Like, I hate the whole thing. What have you guys seen teachers doing that seems interesting, engaging, cool? You know, I love the, like, party at the beach, like, whatever, or a cyborg hand. Like, what just seems like you can get some traction and get some good data that you have seen your own teachers or other teachers doing?
Yeah, that was a lot. The last question was simple. First, I want to speak about what you were talking about how unhealthy constantly suspecting your students of cheating makes your relationship with them. To constantly feel like, is everyone lying to me all the time, doesn't really want to make you get up in the morning and go back to work, right? And I've had to have those conversations with kids, unfortunately, a lot in an English class. And my objective is always to tell them that their voice matters and that I already know how ChatGPT writes. I'm interested in how they write, and that school isn't just something to get through. It's about engaging in a learning experience and developing skills and showing some integrity along the way. That said, there's always going to be some kids who cheat. I hope they feel good about their A's. Like you were saying, like just like a cop can't, give everyone a ticket for speeding. Like I can't catch everybody who's cheating. They will get away with it sometimes, and I tell them that. But telling them that I am reading their work and I want to know what their authentic voice is, I think does help that. I use AI like mostly for personal stuff though, like making a packing list. So that you can talk about what your teachers use it for.
For me personally, I have a teacher who uses AI to generate assignments, which I understand can be convenient, but at the same time, sometimes, AI is not always accurate. So sometimes we'll be watching like a documentary, for example, and then the questions that go with the documentary will be AI generated, and they won't fully align up with what the documentary says. And then as students, we feel really confused, or me personally, I feel really confused when I can't find the answer to a specific question on a worksheet in the documentary. But a creative thing that has been done using AI was in my AP/CSP class, my teacher, she actually coded like Gemini sort of, but for our class. So basically there was like, on our school account, we can go into Gemini, and then there was like a specific setting that she somehow coded into the Gemini that basically helped us write our code for our PPR, which you're allowed to use generative AI as long as you cite it, which I thought that was really creative because it was also more accurate than if we were to have gone on AI ourselves. Like, for example, if we were to use ChatGPT, which would not have been as reliable.
Yeah, so I mean, what I'm encouraging educators to do is to think of all of these things as hypotheses that need to be sort of tested over time. So like, is it a good idea to teach kids in a computer science class to code with Gemini? We might find in a few years that you're like, yes, absolutely, that's what every software engineer in the world does now. We might be like, oh no, that there's like really fundamental things that they're not getting. And I would also encourage teachers to be open to revisiting pen and paper practices, including ones that I gave up a long time ago. I met my first educator, his name's Sean McCusker, who works for the Bill of Rights Institute, who got super excited about pencil and paper microwriting. He's like, I had totally given it up. I didn't want to do anything for it. We did everything digitally, and then he works for the Bill of Rights Institute, so I don't think he's in the classroom yet, but whatever he was doing, he was like, there are some short writing exercises that we can do with pencils where I can really see students thinking, and we can actually move pretty quickly, and they can share with me, and they can share with each other, and I was like, yeah, Sean. We definitely have interviewed plenty of educators who said, I spent the last 10 or 15 years moving towards paperless classrooms, and I was so sick of the human connection that we totally lost in class. I got rid of all of it. I gave all my students composition notebooks. We did everything in pencil and paper, and it's the best classroom experience I've had in years and years and years. That doesn't mean that that's your results may vary and things like that. And in your particular context for the learning goals that you have, it might not work. But I think, for the first time I meet my students 30 times during the year or something like that. And for the first time ever teaching at MIT, we spent one period writing together. And it felt like, it was 3% of my classroom time. And that was a lot to give up, but it was really good for them. And, and I liked it, and they liked it. And, maybe that one lesson that we didn't do that day, we can do without. So maybe not. Maybe I'll be like, this sucks. I really need you to do your writing honestly outside of class so we can do more interesting things in class. But I think playing around with these ideas will be important. Good. It's 8:30. Okay, good. No, I'm going to pass it off to you. So I do have to go home and tuck my own kids into bed and things like that. I think what you're doing here is super, super important. Like if you come up, if at the end of this meeting you were like, what Justin said was garbage and he's wrong and we're going to go in a different direction, I'm thrilled about that. Like what I want you to do is to organize, to share your ideas with the leaders in your schools. And I want you to really listen to students and teachers as you're coming up with their own opinions, because while we all have our own 12-year apprenticeship of experience in schools from a long time ago, the experience of people who are currently in schools really matter. So listen well and communicate well with each other, and absolutely, demand of the educators in your system to say, you're experimenting with technology in a way that no prior generation has. Tell us what kind of evidence you have that this is a good idea. And if they can't provide you with good evidence, then if they can, then think about how you might support them in having that do better. And if they can't, then ask then be in negotiations with them to do better. Good, pleasure spending time with you.